Hi, I'm Baldur, and this is the Conducting Coaching Podcast, where we talk about conducting from the inside. And the very first thing I wanted to say this week is thanks for all your reactions and the comments we had after the last 2 episodes. We also had a brief Zoom meeting with some of the listeners who told me about their particular situations and challenges and questions they're facing in their conducting lives. All of this is really super helpful for me because it helps me to bring my podcast a bit closer to your real situations and hopefully give you some of the right answers. And if I can't give you the answers, then at least asking the right questions. Now this week, we'll talk about something related to career development. We'll talk about studying conducting, where you can learn to conduct, how to find the best places to study, and so on. Now, once you've decided to make conducting part of your lives, there are many options around. Some people study privately, some are largely self-taught or look at this by themselves, or some people go and study conducting either as their main subject or as part of their music degrees. Now, I have to be honest with you. In my opinion, if you want to take conducting seriously, studying privately or simply by yourselves is not going to cut it. You'll have to give this some time and some importance in your lives to look at it in depth. You owe this to the people you work with and you owe it to yourselves. So whatever stages you're at in your lives, I think if you decide to study conducting, you have to take some time out and study this properly because it's just too wide a field. Because there's not just the conducting technique and how you move your hands or the academic subjects like ear training or score reading and so on. There's also everything around, leadership, communication and so on. You have to give this some time and to build proper foundations. Now, what I mean by foundations is you need a technical platform. You need something to build your further development on. And it's not really serious to do this on a job. You can't just stand in front of a group and then somehow learn as you go. Because there is a technical part to conducting. You need to have at least a physical language, need to be able to move the baton on your hands in a way that you can communicate yourself clearly. You have to be able to read a score. You have to be able to plan a rehearsal and so on. And this is something that you can learn and that you have to learn before you start working. The technical part of conducting is never as difficult as learning an instrument, for example. Because in conducting, what is really hard is what comes later in a certain way. You apply the technique or whatever you learned in your studies to the people and the music you have in front of you. And this is a lifelong process. But you need the foundations at some stage. And you need also this reflection on, how the communication works, what a conductor really has to do, and just seeing the situation from the conductor's point of view. And that's what you learn in conducting studies. It doesn't matter if it's undergraduate or postgraduate, but at least at some stage in your life, you have to give this some time and move it center of your activity. Now, why do I say this? This is because sometimes I see conductors or avoiding certain type of repertoire because they simply don't have the technique or the ear, to work with this, or they can't study certain scores in a certain complexity or a certain character because they just don't have technical foundations. And also sometimes I see, student or youth orchestras or so who could play much, much better if they would have just a conductor who conducts in a natural way, just has a sort of a solid technical foundation. When I talk to musicians sometimes who want to become conductors, they say like, can you just teach me how to move my hands because, the rest I can do because I'm a really experienced musician. This is not doing conducting justice because the issue of conducting is much larger than how you move your hands. You have to look at things from a conductor's point of view. You have to work in, how to exchange between you and the musicians, how to work with your ear, what to rehearse and so on. And there are things that you simply have to work out for yourselves before you step up in front of a group. So give this some time and study it properly. Right, so I got this off my chest and now we can start looking at where you should go and study or how to take that decision, how to find the best possible place for you to learn to conduct. Now, the first thing you have to ask yourself before you look at places is, there are some specializations in conducting, like, there's orchestral conducting, the courses specialized in choral conducting, wind band conducting, brass band conducting as part of school teacher programs geared towards music theater and so on. So you have to think a little bit in which is the area in which you want to go. You also maybe have to think if you want to do this as part of a degree or as a sort of a principal study. A lot of people maybe do undergraduate study in a different musical subject, studying an instrument or so, or a different focus, composers and so on, and then do a postgrad in conducting, or they do it as part of their course, or they just simply start with conducting as their main subject straight away. So these are a few decisions you have to take before you look at specific places, because, conservatoires and the universities, they have different courses and different degree options on offer. So it's good if you have some of this clear before you start looking. Now, when you start looking for good places to study conducting, one of the first questions you have to ask yourself is where this place is. For example, which country is it in? Is it near a musical center? Is it in a city? Is it on a campus outside? I'll tell you why. This is for several reasons. First of all, as a conductor, I think it's not just important, like what you learn in the classes or what you learn inside the walls of your conservatoire. There's so many things coming into conducting, and the inspiration in your student years is so important. So if you can go to great concerts, you can maybe talk to great artists, you go to museums, to exhibitions, you see theater, you have great libraries around, and it's just like a culturally rich environment that will stimulate you. This is a great benefit in conducting, because all of this comes somehow into your work. And these years when you go and study should be full of experiences that later inspire you, to go further. And there is also a career aspect to the location of a place, because if you plan to go, for example, into the professional conducting world, you want to get in touch with agents, with people who make conducting careers. You want to see other people who are maybe just a bit above your stage where you are at the moment and so on. Then it's not great if you're on a campus that is completely closed off from any type of musical reality. It's great that you are at least near a big musical center where people can see you and where sort of careers can be made. So obviously it's a difference, for example, if you study in London, let's say, or in a big city that has a great musical life, rather than somewhere without any contact to the outside professional music world. I'm also saying this because the place where you study is usually where you make your first professional connections. You have your fellow students and you have the musical life around, and you live in that city or that place for a while. So the most likely situation is that after you graduated, this place where you studied will be the place where you take your first musical steps. So think about that, where you can do that. Think about things like, work permits, language, and so on. And if there is like a musical infrastructure that allows a young conductor to make their first steps. Maybe it's not ideal to be in a super big pond like in Vienna, New York or London or so. Maybe some smaller cities with also fewer conductors around are good options. But the issue of physical location, where your school is going to be, is very important. Now, another fundamental aspect when choosing a place to study is the amount of podium time you get. Conducting is not something you can learn sitting at a desk. You can't just think about it, because the essence of conducting is the work with real musicians. The cause and effect between your gestures and how people play, how you affect the sound, how you work with your ear, how you rehearse and so on. And then going away again from a rehearsal, analyzing with a teacher, looking at your videos, going through the processes in your mind, looking at the technical things and so on. This sort of combination between practice and analysis is essential in order to progress. A conservatoire should be like a protected environment where you don't have to be afraid to make a fool out of yourselves, because this is what is going to help you to progress. Leading on from this, the next thing you would have to look at is the teacher itself. Teaching conducting is very sensitive, because a lot of the things that are important in conducting happen inside people's head. So there has to be somebody who has the sensitivity and also the skill to ask the right questions, to really work on conducting in relation to, the kind of person he or she has in front. Because all this is individual, and the teachers that just apply the same sort of system to every student, for me, they are not the best in teaching conducting. It has to be somebody that you really trust, that can really understand what is going on and how to get you further. So this is a very sensitive position, and it has to be somebody that you trust with this very important role. Some potential teachers you maybe already worked with, met them in courses or so, and you have to trust a bit your instinct in that aspect. Some people have great track records of turning fantastic conductors out. And if you feel that there is a trust and a sympathy between you, I think this aspect is really important, because you will have quite intimate contact with that person. Then also look at the conducting classes. Some conservatoires or universities, you will have very few conducting students, sometimes just one or two or so. I think that is not ideal, because you also learn from your colleagues. You learn from people who have different skills than you, who are better at some things than you, who push you to work harder, and you have these conversations, looking at things from the same point of view, from a conductor's point of view, sharing experiences and so on. You know this probably from courses, where sometimes the best conversations you have is with other students. So make sure you have an environment, a student environment around you that stimulates. Maybe not even just conductors, but also other musicians, like top class people who are striving, to be the best, and who can challenge you and who can inspire you to dig deeper. And then maybe the last thing I would mention, these podcasts are so short, for so much information, but, I would look at the type of diploma you get at the end of your course. You have to see from your own perspective if you really need a diploma. A diploma in conducting is usually, or a certificate, is just useful in a university or an educational environment, amateur environment, student environment, and so on. In the professional world, nobody ever really asks you for a diploma, because people don't care. But if you need one, and if you have one, it's definitely, a good thing to have. You never know where you end up, but make sure that these diplomas, they can really be convalidated in where you want to work. For example, if you want to go back to your country, is this course really going to give you the recognition or the documentation that you need, in order to apply for certain jobs and so on. And you have to check this before you go and study, because a lot of people go and then they find out, this degree doesn't really do what I needed to do, or I can't use this for certain things I wanted to do. So check that out before you go and study somewhere on a course for 4 years or so, that in the end is no use to you. Now, in my musical life, I got to know a lot of the conservatoires and the universities who have conducting courses, the great conducting faculties and so on. I got to meet a lot of students. So if you have questions, please send them in. I'll try to answer them, because I realize that this is a decision you often have to take before you know a lot about conducting. So don't be shy. I'm trying to answer, and that's what the Conducting Coaching Podcast in the end is there for, to help you to get to know a bit more about the whole conducting world. So I'll speak to you next week. I'm Baldur, the Conducting Coaching Podcast. Have a good time. Thanks for listening. To send us your comments or suggestions, please write us a message on Instagram. And don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter to stay up to date with all the conducting coaching news and events.